Welcome to Tracy's Terrors. If you love horror and appreciate smart animal commentary, then you are in the right place. Today, Strigoi, VamPullet, and I will be discussing Stephen Cognetti's, I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, Stephen Cognetti's film 825 Forest Road, which is streaming on Shudder and other platforms. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and visit the website, tracysterrors.com. So let's get started. Stephen Cognetti's 825 Forest Road is a character-driven horror drama that's pretending to be something else, focusing heavily on a hideous mannequin and a twitchy ghost clad in mourning. Think Sadako meets the Woman in Black. The trailer seems to promise a jump scare bonanza, but the film itself is actually much more subdued. This may leave some horror fans wanting more. I, on the other hand, wanted even less. I wish that Cognetti had dropped the flashy effects altogether, since they only distract from the film's real strength, which is its deft exploration of volatile interpersonal dynamics. Cognetti excels at orchestrating cringy drama. You know the kind I'm talking about, crafting sequences so uncomfortable that you can't look away. But he's less adept at creating and staging an interesting monster, often scavenging from the recycled bin of horror cliche. And what's more, I suspect he knows this. Throughout the film, there are what seem to be deliberate decisions to confound cinematic norms, a kind of self-conscious turning away from the visual image in favor of austere conversation. And these unorthodox moves were enough to keep me, a cynical horror fan who's kind of tired of J-horror trickle-down, deeply engaged, and I found myself immersed in this movie even though the trailer had prepared me to dismiss it. So let's jump into the summary. If you know what the film is about, go ahead and skip ahead. 825 Forest Road opens with Chuck, his wife Maria, and his sister Isabel moving into an old house in the small town of Ashland Falls. Their coming together as a family unit is the result of a recent tragedy. 3 months earlier, the siblings' mother died in a car wreck, and Isabel, who was driving, is consumed by guilt and grief. In an attempt to support her through this crisis and mitigate his own regret, he had been estranged from his family for years, Chuck has uprooted his wife Maria from her life in the city and taken a job at Ashland University so that Isabel, who will be attending the school, can recover in a stable home. But Ashland, it turns out, may not be the safest place for her. As Chuck soon learns from neighbors, the town is cursed by the ghost of Helen Foster, a woman who, from the 1940s, who in the modern day has it out for depressed teens and haunts them until they commit suicide. The only way to stop Helen is to find the house where she lived, the titular 825 Forest Road, and destroy it, which is harder than it sounds because the address has been expunged from contemporary town maps. Can Chuck track the house down before the ghost destroys his family? The biggest problem with this film is the ghost of Helen Foster, whose derivative look and nonsensical history threaten to sink the entire production. The legend of Helen goes like this. When she discovered that her daughter Mary was being viciously tormented by a classmate, she contacted everyone involved, the school's administrators, the students' parents, but no one would help, and eventually Mary committed suicide. Unhinged by her daughter's death, Helen murdered the bully and the bully's family before killing herself. A sad story, to be sure, but it seems like an isolated case of revenge, a directed attack on the people who made her child's life hell. Why would Helen's desire for vengeance extend beyond the original perpetrators and time period to target all of Ashland's depressed teens for eternity? And kids struggling with mental health issues, given how closely they align with her daughter's demographic, are the least obvious targets of Helen's wrath. You would expect her to sympathize with them, not catalyze their self-destruction. In other words, the logic of her backstory is just incoherent. Rather than creating continuity between the past and the present, it introduces narrative inconsistencies that distract from some of the film's broader themes. And maybe I'm cynical, but the decision to deploy bullying here feels like a reach for relevance, an easy way to garner sympathy for Helen by injecting a topical subject. The film's plot seems a little exploitative in that sense. And so too does the obvious borrowing from horror trends that, while once spooky, now seem well past their prime. The clearest influence here is J-horror. Helen's movements are staccato, jerky, and always accompanied by that sinister sound of bone crunching. If her unnatural lurching is pure Sadako, her 19th century morning gown could have been torn from the back of Jeanette Humphrey, the titular woman in The Woman in Black, whose ebony draped form seems to have become an endlessly reproducing horror meme. For another contemporary iteration of this figure, see the unimaginatively titled The Woman in the Yard. Indeed, so eager is Cognetti to insert this kind of threadbare trope into his story that he's willing to be anachronistic, wrenching it straight out of its original Victorian context and dropping it into 1940s America, when grieving women no longer wore corsets and shrouded themselves in black lace. Why is Helen dressed like this if the incident occurred in the 1940s? Helen is the product of recycled parts, and while directors can't entirely fix the problem of a boring monster with visual craft, they can usually inject some tension and terror by way of inventive staging and composition. Unfortunately, in that area, 825 Forest Road plays like an homage to Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House, a series that, to my mind, ran periphery horror, the kind of horror that invites analysis of individual frames straight into the ground. Fans of Flanagan love replaying scenes in slow motion, searching for Easter eggs, those hideous ghosts or monsters hidden in dark corners behind, blissfully unaware characters. And if you want to play this game with 825 Forest Road, you certainly can. Helen's often standing unobtrusively against walls or in closets. But I think I speak for a lot of filmgoers when I say that this tactic, once fresh and terrifying, has lost its power through repetition. And don't get me started on the digital glitching that happens whenever Helen is near a recording laptop. Sure, in the 80s and 90s, it was cool when ghosts interfered electromagnetically with VHS technology. It was also impressive in the early 20th century when the dead made the jump from analog to digital in order to interrupt data streams. But by now, in 2025, the blocking and heavy pixelation are about as surprising as like a moving planchette or a flickering candle flame. And it's time for the spirits to get a new calling card. The good news is that all of these cliches can't keep a good movie down. And 825 Forest Road is a good movie. It's just that its strength lies not where the trailer would have us look, in the ghost of Helen Foster, in the hackney effects used to create her, but rather in the film's human characters and their interpersonal relationships. The situation at 825 Forest Road is a pressure cooker, bubbling with conflicting desires, ugly emotions, and really awkward attempts to conceal them. In this context of persistent microaggressions and psychological stress, the film's big bad ghost feels superfluous. Throughout 825 Forest Road, characters fumble toward communication, always feeling more than they say and almost inevitably saying the wrong thing. And this sense of emotional groping is most palpable during discussions of mental health, a subject that Cognetti handles with more realism and sensitivity than I've ever seen in a horror film. Gone are the genre's harmful associations between mental illness and monstrosity, those cheap shortcuts that conflate common mood disorders with psychopathy. In their place, we see Isabel and Maria trying to take care of themselves and get by. While kitchen table conversations about suicidal ideation don't make it into the trailer, a totally sensible decision, in this film, Cognetti makes artistic decisions that clearly prioritize the character's inner states over the more kinetic external drama. He organizes the film in chapters that, rather than moving the plot along in a linear fashion from point A to point B, focus on how Chuck, Isabel, and Maria see and misinterpret the same events. De-emphasizing the incidents themselves, this structure foregrounds the complexity of relationships, the nuances of communication, and the always present potential for misunderstanding. His focus on consciousness and intersubjectivity takes an almost provocative turn when, in a subversion of cinematic conventions, which are all about seeing, He refuses to visualize things that could easily be shown. In a less thoughtful film, we would have scenes of Isabel talking to a therapist, which would be intercut with flashbacks illustrating her narrative. Here, however, we watch Isabel describe her thoughts and feelings to a recording device, a technological stand-in for the doctor she doesn't have. Subtracting from the scene the minimal visual interest that an actual human interlocutor would have added, this move forces us to listen more closely to her words. Much of what she says could have been translated into imagery, but instead the film stubbornly sticks with her flat account delivered in an ordinary bedroom. Directorial decisions like this stand out, and I can't help but read them as a rejection of the sensory overload style of filmmaking that has come to dominate the horror genre. Maybe budget concerns and not artistic vision are behind Cognetti's turn away from the visual. After all, talk is cheap. And it's true that the Friends of Gardening meeting, in which locals lay out at great length the dark history of Ashland Falls to Chuck, is a relatively inexpensive way of delivering a complicated backstory. But as indie horror directors have shown time and time again, necessity is the mother of invention. If financial constraint was a factor here, and I have no idea, I'm just guessing, it seems to be in every film, then Cognetti skillfully leverages it to explore how urban legends are created and perpetuated. We see the process in action as Chuck's neighbors relate personal anecdotes about Helen and repeat rumors that they've heard. The strange power dynamic at the heart of storytelling is laid bare. New details about Helen are currency, and speakers obviously enjoy the attention that comes with telling a juicy tale. Caught up in this atmosphere of terror and excitement, I was disappointed when the real Helen crashed the party, abruptly ending this spell. It turns out that Helen's far more frightening in legend than in fact. Her appearance and backstory all feel secondary to the drama between Chuck, Isabel, and Maria. But what would I have Cognetti do? Remove the ghost from his ghost story? Not at all. I just wish he had continued in the mode of the opening scene. There, Ashley, a teen who's been investigating Helen, is alone at home and on a Zoom call with a friend when she hears violent hammering on her bedroom door. Stunned into silence, she opens it midway through a barrage of knocks, and the hallway is empty. This is not a prelude to a jump scare. We aren't waiting for the teen to relax so that the abrupt appearance of a ghost can send all of us into cardiac arrest. No. The absence continues to be an absence. The tension is never relieved or resolved, and the dread lingers. To me, this is Helen at her most powerful. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. It would really mean a lot to these two and to me as well. Also, visit the website, tracysterrors.com. There you'll find more reviews and other things, so check it out. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Take care.